Hello, I'm Tracy Bannon, and you're watching the Cloud Therapist channel.
Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. I've been waiting to do this talk for a very long time, and I really appreciate Tracy for coming on to do this talk with me. We're going to be focusing on the journey to cloud and the stages there that actually are required for going into cloud as enterprises migrate into the cloud. So let me say hello to Tracy and let me ask her to do a quick intro. Tracy, how are you doing? And welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel.
Well, thank you for having me, and I am doing just right today. It's another beautiful day here in Pennsylvania. Let's see a little bit about myself. My name Tracy Bannon. I go by Trace. We dropped the Y a long time ago. There's some fun stories about that.
Okay.
What's more important to our conversation, though, is that I've spent a couple of decades as a software architect, hands-on, software engineering degree as well, and we have been helping people to migrate. Not just to the cloud, but try and make the decisions on what goes where, because it's much like your money. You need to know all the different places where you have investments, so your code and your computer assets are in a lot of different places. I currently work for a company called the MITRE Corporation, kind of a funky group. It is a federally funded research and development group that was created by Congress, and there are a number of them in the United States. My job, it's to tell the government the right direction to go. It's to be out on the leading edge. We have folks who have patents in all kinds of technologies, but it's all objective. Our goal is not to make money. We're not for profit. So it's a pretty cool place to be. I get to shoot straight with everybody.
Fantastic. And you also mentioned you have a broadcast as well that you do online?
I do. I have a number of different podcasts and blogs and even a book that I've contributed to. The podcast that I think that everybody would get a kick out of, really appreciate, is called Real Technologists. And it's all about the origin stories, meeting with today's leading edge thinkers and tracking back to, where did you come from? How did you make these decisions? How in the heck did you end up here? And the life stories of these folks are inspiring, and they stretch you in every possible way, but it really helps you with your creativity and your thought diversity. So
Fantastic.
It's realtechnologist.org.
Great, excellent. So we'll certainly provide some details in the description of the talk for that. So yeah, so let's get the ball rolling. So I kind of wanted to maybe just kind of explain to the audience first that there's a sort of a number of areas and places that we could probably go, but we'll try and maybe kind of just focus it on a particular chart that I've been using for some time and developing for a long time. And Tracy actually, when I shared it with Tracy, she seemed to kind of agree with this, so that was great that we actually saw eye to eye on that. And although actually disagreeing is also a good thing, because it kind of makes for good debate as well. But it's kind of a chart that I've been using for a long time to really explain sort of the journey to cloud. So how can organizations really migrate to cloud? What are all the kind of the stages involved? What does it actually mean? And what would you need to do at each stage? And actually kind of what would you get out of each stage as well, and things like that. So as I'm talking, you should see this on your screen. So I'll be sharing it on the screen with you as I'm talking like this. Feel free to pause the video at this point if you want, so you can actually study it a little bit more. But again, I'll certainly make it available online, and it'll be also available. Maybe I'll put it towards the end of the video, who knows. But anyway, point being is that this journey to cloud chart is really, like I said, depicting that sort of the stages that you require to actually go. Tracy, what was kind of your feeling on the chart itself? How did you feel about it when I kind of first presented it to you?
Well, I'm always a fan of pink, so you had my undying, unwavering support at that point. In all honesty, you and I had talked previously before you shared the chart with me that there are lots of folks have different approaches, but they all seem to come back to some kind of set of R's. The R's could be 3 R's, 5 R's, 7 R's. And I think this is a very strong depiction. Yeah, now it does say the app migration journey. And what folks really need to take away from this is migrating one app is migrating one app. Most organizations have entire portfolios. So it's very common as we go through this and explain it to folks, it's common that they will actually be living in many of these different stages with different applications at one time. But it's great to have this thought leadership. I think probably another aspect that I want folks to walk away with is that we really key in on the word heritage, meaning your lineage, where things come from. It's always important to have the context. And when we talk about heritage data centers, it doesn't mean we're jettisoning all your data center heritage. It means that we have to take that into consideration, the decisions that were made as we carry forward that heritage, that context, that lineage has such importance as we go through the decision journey and start this migration.
Absolutely. And as we said, this is a journey, right? It's not something that you kind of land somewhere and say, there you go, that's it. I'm now in the cloud, all done and dusted, and I kind of walk away, right? So that's the thing. And there are also a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions along the way with both the kind of the technology, but also, what do you need to do organizationally and kind of how you should set your strategy for, migrating to cloud and then sort of operating in the cloud, having a cloud operating model, so to speak, as well.
And there's another piece of this diagram as folks study it. And I do recommend folks grab a copy of this, download it. And this is a great asset. Under Heritage Data Center, while we say monolithic, it's actually very possible within your data center to not be monolithic, to have what we call cloud ready. So there are additional shades of gray that we can apply to this to understand how you get after your decision points, right? To your point of a monolith, if you truly have an application that's a big ball, that your first step truly may be, well, let's just rehost it. We will lift this up and we will shift this over. And I think the place that we start to educate folks right now on this podcast or this video cast is to say, rehosting doesn't mean that there's no change. Lift and shift comes with a fair amount of tinkering, doesn't it, Richard?
Indeed, yeah. And also you mentioned the point earlier, which was quite interesting, as you said, there's sort of the 5 R's, 6 R's, and 7 R's. And I actually did spot one with 7 R's on it. So I'll try and make that link available to the audience.
Well, you've got 6. You've got 6. So there's somebody out there that beats you with the 7.
Yeah. I think I've kind of settled for probably the public cloud providers offer. 6 R's is good enough for me, and that makes a lot of sense. And talking of those, so as you said, we're kind of coming from that sort of heritage data center. So we have our traditional IT, but also there was this kind of segment, which I think you and I kind of talked about a little bit, what I would call transient IT. Now, that's not necessarily an industry term. It might be after this video, you never know. But the point about this kind of segment was, I think enterprises started kind of finding the process of procurement and really getting a project up and running in the traditional sort of sense of IT, very time consuming. It took a long time to really kind of go into a live production sort of environment. So a number of sort of vendors and people kind of in the industry started coming up with alternative ways or things that would actually help to accelerate that process. So in that particular part of the chart, it's things like hyper-converged infrastructure. On the open source side, we saw things like OpenStack kind of coming up to maybe give VMware and vSphere sort of a run for its money or compete with it. And then there was kind of responses from those more established players with things like software-defined data center. And then that got crazy to things like software-defined networking, software-defined storage. And then we got to sort of software-defined everything. Even that term was being sort of used at the time. But would you say, Tracy, that was kind of the that sort of response to kind of those very long procurement sort of timescales?
I think so. I think so. I would add into this, right? I would add some shades of gray under the heritage data center, like I said, that kind of takes us from monolith. I would shift the monolithic just a little bit more to the left. And in what we're
Right.
calling transient, I would actually start to add in some of the cloud-like competencies, like
Right.
Red Hat OpenShift goes in the data center, and it's beautiful. And I can make the choice, right? This is a K8s, right? We're using containers. It's Kubernetes based. That goes in the data center as well. So there are shades of gray within the data center that actually can prepare us for future migration or allow us to work in that blended world
Right.
that still exists. So I'd probably make that, but your point is spot on that it was really hard at first. I remember having to order hardware and make sure that it came from the same manufacturing lot.
Yeah.
I had a production issue that went on for 6 weeks, and it came down to a NIC card. We had 2 NIC cards in every
Right.
server, and one of the NIC cards was manufactured separately and differently. It was a different NIC card. It was terrifying, right? Those were the things that we went through, making sure that we were studying everything physically. And, once we got to a point where we could start to stamp out our, you remember ghosting images, stamping out new images as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I remember high-fiving that we could start to do that. So I believe your heritage data center layout on this slide, pretty good. I might add a little bit more of that tinkering that I mentioned, but that starts to help us to understand people being a little bit more ready to think about cloud. Those who have already done some cloud ready type of thinking inside their data center oftentimes are a little bit more on the leading edge to being able to move towards cloud.
Indeed. And our applications kind of are, the traditional client server, kind of three layer sort of approach, what we kind of now call sort of monolithic applications, if you like. That's kind of where we are, and that's where we're coming from in terms of our heritage. Okay, so let's break down the 4 stages, because those are the kind of the cloud stage. Now, at the top of the chart, I mentioned a number of the actual cloud names. So these kind of go everything from sort of private to edge cloud. I've even heard that being mentioned. Polycloud, which is an interesting one. And you've got things like multi-cloud and cross-cloud. And we're not going to be able to cover all of those, but essentially multi-cloud, I think everybody's aware of that. Edge is kind of extending your cloud onto this sort of the edge of your environment. Cross-cloud is essentially where you run the same application on multiple clouds. Now, I don't know if anybody's brave enough to do that, but hey, it's out there. It's a term. And maybe somebody's doing it. If anybody's watching this who is actually doing that, please let us know in the comments. That'll be quite interesting to know. I'd love to hear about that. Now, the interesting one that I heard through a colleague of mine, who is actually a regular on the channel, Paul, just saying hello, Paul Bevan. He mentioned the term polycloud, and I said, well, you got to explain what that means to me. And essentially, what it means is your investment or all your main applications are in one cloud, but you're using another cloud for a specific application. So it's very app specific kind of approach. So maybe you're using kind of BigQuery in Google Cloud, for example, but all your other applications are in AWS or Azure or something like that. And that would make it a sort of a polycloud approach. I won't go into any more details on that, because I'm sure people are going to disagree with it, but sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that I actually see that a fair amount. I work a lot with governments, and it is, so you want to cloud. If we think of cloud only as IaaS, only as infrastructure, then it's more commoditized. But as we crawl the stacks of the offerings, there are unique and good things where, consider Azure, because you have O365, if that's your organization. I may not want to host everything else there. I might want to go to Google because of their incredible math, right? And their data-oriented applications. So I see people making those very smart decisions and not investing all in one cloud, but they're also not spinning up a workload and moving the workload back and forth. It's not,
Right.
I'm in Google today and I can get a better price tomorrow in Azure. So I'll move
Right.
the workload there.
Right.
And the next day I move it over to IBM. And the next day I move it over to AWS.
Yeah.
That's not the case. That is more of the multi-cloud philosophy of being able to commoditize. But as you crawl the stack, the more that you leverage from those cloud providers, the more you're going to be able to live in that poly-cloud world. So I really like that term.
Yeah, I have to say it kind of took some time to grow on me, but it has, and I do agree with that. Okay, so let's go into the stages. So stage one in that sort of cloud space is that sort of rehosting, or is also colloquially known as lift and shift. Tracy, what's kind of your take on stage one?
This is the low-hanging fruit, especially if you have organizations that are pushing back, they're afraid, they're risk, they got a real low risk tolerance. They believe that you can often help them to dip their toes in the water with lift and shift. The problem is that you're not leveraging any of the additional goodness of the cloud. Why do we want cloud? Well, we want to be able to spin things up, using auto scaling. We want to be able to decompose our applications so there's better resiliency for them. Lift and shift means I take it and I bucket it in whatever way possible, whether I put it into a container or I rehost VMs. People do this. It literally means that I move it. There is some rejiggering that has to go on when you do it. Lift and shift is never as easy as pick the pot up from burner 1 and move it to burner 2.
It's not a copy and paste, right?
It is not. No, or as we used to say in the olden days. In the olden days, we used to say it's not just an X copy.
Yes,
so
exactly.
So I've now just told everybody my age. I've inferred it. The rehosting is a smart way to start. But when people rehost, the guidance is always, what do we need to do to improve this? How can we better leverage these competencies for you? Sometimes lifting and shifting is necessary if there is a desire to reduce reduce the heritage data center costs. So it's all trade-off. It's all trade-off. It might be good to get you there so you get that first quick win, set your corporate momentum. It could have some values, but don't leave it there. If that application is going to be long-lived, don't leave it as though it has just been lifted and shifted if it's going to be a long-lived application, because you're not going to get any of the additional benefits aside from infrastructure.
Yeah, and you mentioned something interesting, the necessity part of it. I think this has come in probably handy for certain organizations when, for example, they somebody higher up at the CXO level makes a decision to close down the data center or move some of the data center into a managed service kind of environment, but the rest of the applications will have to migrate to cloud because they're kind of thinking of cloud. They've probably been on a an event or a presentation somewhere and been convinced within an hour or something that they gotta change their strategy to cloud. So that kind of necessity is there. But we also saw more recently, this during the pandemic stage as well. So the pandemic is where organizations had to mobilize, they had to enable a remote workforce. There was nobody around to go into a data center and hot swap drives and failed fans and things like that, right? So the easiest kind of solution was to maybe lift and shift that particular workload into the cloud so it can kind of be remotely managed and so on. So that was probably the kind of the more recent reason why you'd kind of want to lift and shift.
I saw some of that, but I also saw during the height of the lockdowns, we were doing things to reduce risk as well. And so we had folks that went into data centers and we were very cautious about how we brought them in. So some folks actually dug in deep and stayed where they were, waiting until the dust settled, so to speak, waiting until lockdowns were over so that they could do that. I think it did stir the pot quite a bit. It stirred the pot a lot. Folks needed to go to Zoom. They needed to go to MS Teams. They needed to go to whatever, WebEx. So if they were a company that didn't use any kind of cloud before, they suddenly were using some sort of cloud, even if it wasn't hosting their applications. So if nothing more, the lockdowns did drive us towards cloud consumption, smart cloud consumption.
Right. Indeed. Okay. And we saw a number of technologies, and again, the chart kind of shows a number of the technologies that you might encounter at this, at stage one. Now, these are kind of slightly shared with, with stage two for me. But what do you think kind of those technologies that I've listed out in the chart? What's your sort of take on those?
I think that, as I've said, I think that this is a great reference for folks. No diagram is going to cover absolutely everything,
Yeah.
but this covers a lot. This is one of those good, I won't say good enough because that demeans it. This is good.
Yeah.
This is good. The items that are there, the technologies where you are on your journey, I think are absolutely spot on. We did have to consider, and we do have to consider what that persistent storage look like. The apps themselves, we're stateful apps. And if we're lifting and shifting, we took that stateful app from on-premise to the cloud. And then we have to start to think about what do we need to do to improve this. So I mentioned in rehosting, you don't want to stay there forever unless it's going to be an application that has a horizon, a sunset, destination. And that's something we don't necessarily show here, is the question of how long is that app going to live?
Right.
I may need to rehost it quickly, and I might just leave it there and let it die there because it's going to be replaced. But if I'm going to have it live a little bit longer time, I need to make some improvements, and that gets us into the replatforming, the shaping, the changes, and making decisions. Do I move from stateless or move to stateless from stateful? What does that mean? What additional monitoring do I need if I start to break down some pieces of my monolith so that I can better leverage the cloud services to enable me? I mean, the big win that comes out of the, right away, as you start to crawl that stack from IaaS to PaaS, is all the monitoring capabilities that are available to you if you're not simply running a big old VM in the cloud, not simply running a huge container that shouldn't have all that stuff in it.
Yeah, and also, I mean, obviously the stage has had some detractors as well. So, clearly, I think strategically we can say, yes, it's kind of helped in certain situations. We shouldn't hang around there if we don't have to. We need to kind of, as we said, look at this as a journey. So applications should move up the stack or up the stages as we go. But also more recently, there has been kind of a little bit more, a number of sort of detractors of lift and shift and saying, it's not the best use of cloud. We've certainly seen a sort of a backlash over the last 18 months in terms of cloud cost management and things like FinOps coming into it as well to kind of try and help us with the cost of cloud. So yeah, what's your kind of take on that? Is that kind of a controversial thing, or would you agree with that?
Well, we all said we have to do Agile, and then we have to do or buy some DevOps, and we got to go to the cloud. All right, we all have to do that. Got to do that.
Yeah.
Everything has a cost associated with it. Everything has a risk associated with it. Everything has a benefit associated with it. And it's the balance of those things. Cloud costs, I think, really surprised people, really surprised them. They thought they would save all that data center cost. I no longer have sunk costs in hardware. The cloud costs can be, well, overwhelming, especially when it comes to storage, data storage.
Yeah.
Compute is rarely what costs you the most. It's oftentimes going to be your storage as well as your data movement, your ingress and your egress. Now, I did read something this morning that I thought I'd mention, Richard. There was a posting by Google, and I want to follow up with this. I've got some questions.
Me too.
That they are going to drop their egress costs. They are going to become the golden child if it's true that they are going to make it easier, because there's a cost of moving data. Folks don't realize every time you move into a cloud, or you move cloud to cloud, or even sometimes between cloud accounts, there's a cost to moving that data. And it's been massively profitable for the cloud vendors. Doesn't make them evil, but they got to turn a buck. But they've turned a lot of dollars, they've turned a lot of money, by that piece specifically.
Yeah, I picked up on that as well. So Google, I guess, is kind of trying to make some different, or distinguish itself there. And now all eyes are on Amazon and Microsoft and the rest as well to see what happens. So that is an interesting one, and maybe one that we can pick up on in a future talk. I think that will be very, very interesting. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the some of the sort of issues that we've seen around stage one. But certainly has been helpful in the past, and will probably continue to be helpful, as we said, for certain types of workloads as we go through. Okay, so let's move on to stage two. So this is what I would kind of call a sort of a lift and reshape, or a replatform. So what we're doing here is we're taking the same monolithic application that we could also have had in stage one, or have had in stage one, but actually putting it on a different platform. And we don't necessarily mean platform by cloud platform, but actually running in a different environment, if you like. So we go from that sort of instance, as some people call it, in the cloud, or virtual machine in the cloud, to actually running it in a containerized environment. Okay, so this is the first time where we kind of shove that big monolithic application into a containerized environment. And try and really kind of make it behave as if it were, in that, native to that particular environment.
Well, I actually see Rehost and the Replatform, the way that you're describing it, many of the organizations that I work with, their lift and shift means that they containerize. That is how they are doing their lift and shift. So we're going to take everything and we're going to build a container. We're going to bring in a specialist who knows how to build a container, and they build a single massive container.
Wow.
And so they're right. And so I often see that that's their first step. I'm a hater, but I will support them when they do that. And then if we want to use that term replatform in that same context, it is helping them to take the database and put the database somewhere else. Think about having, if it's an N-tier application, thinking about having a container. It can be a single container. It's not going to scale out horizontally, but a single container per layer, to start to do an intro to replatforming. All of these things we've drawn as heavy boxes, but there is tremendous overlap. There is no chalk line that says you are rehosting only, or you're replatforming only, or you're refactoring only. It's all shades of gray. I'm trying to categorize it so people understand what their options are, right?
Exactly. And obviously, I guess the advantage would be, as we said, you're kind of looking at, getting a little bit of experience around containers and orchestration, but also it allows you ever so slightly, perhaps, to get, to provide some flexibility and scalability for that application. It's not going to be pretty. It's not probably the best option. It's not going to necessarily scale fantastically as maybe a cloud native application. But hey, it kind of gives you some of that flexibility. And ironically, I was speaking to somebody a while back, and I showed them this chart while we were having some exec dinner somewhere, and lots of wine was flowing. And this guy was from one of these other global system integrators. And when he saw stage two, he said, "Oh, that's exactly what we do for our customers. We containerize all their apps." So I thought, okay, I'm not going crazy. This actually is it's a happening thing.
Oh no, it is a thing. It's whether it's one container, or is it a strategic grouping of containers, and how much of that rejiggering between a single lift and shift, whether it's one VM, one host. The reason that I see a lot of people putting it into a single container is that they have a hard time with the actual IaaS themselves, with spinning up servers and connecting and use it, because the names of the different capabilities are slightly different than what they are if I have cables that I'm literally plugging together, right? That I'm using my routers. All of those things are a little bit different. So oftentimes we'll see that first app be completely in a single container. And you're right, there are organizations that have made their lifeblood out of helping people to do some initial decomposition that would categorize on this graphic as that replatforming, a little bit of reshaping, just enough,
Right.
but I'm not dramatic changes.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. And as we said, the tech side of it kind of it shares, I guess, a number of the of those with stage one. So again, we're continuing kind of with a stateful sort of approach. You still got that sort of persistent storage, but we'd like to kind of maybe see more cost management, more FinOps coming in at this stage, because things are getting a little bit more wild in our cloud environment. We need to keep an eye on sort of our costs and things like that, as we maybe even develop our experience as well. So going kind of from that basics and fundamentals of cloud in stage one, to containers and orchestration, things like that in stage two as well. So maybe a little bit of that cloud center of excellence, cloud operating model. You need to kind of get those foundations really, if you haven't already. Which we obviously kind of recommend that you should have done that much sooner. But if you haven't done that, then that needs to be in place, as well as things like monitoring as well.
Well, we have to be so aware of additional costs that can happen, right? We don't just have one environment, right? And we have multiple environments. I've got clients that build in their data centers and deploy to clouds. I have others that are using all cloud for all of their environments, right? So you have where your developers are, where how many testing environments you have varies. Some folks just have 3, right? They've got a complete dev environment that has allows the developers to have quite a lot of latitude, and then they lock it down as they integrate and it flows through their pipeline. One of the costs, though, that people don't realize is that unless you have developers that are working round the clock, those environments can and should be spun down. Yeah. You need to have your scripts in place, so that you need to have your alerts in place that spin these things down so that you're not wasting. And it is a waste. Why would I leave it running? It's like, it reminds me of telling the kids as they're leaving the house, turn the lights off, close the door.
Exactly.
Right.
I agree. Okay. So far we've kind of been working with the same application code, right? We haven't really made a great deal of change, maybe some config changes and, to kind of make it behave in this sort of brave new world of cloud. But really stage 3, the refactor and modernize, is where we have to really kind of leave that old cycle, old way of developing applications and move on to more sort of agile and DevOps sort of approach. So this is kind of where the technology kind of maybe clashes with, the culture, changing the culture, changing the perception of how we do application development, especially if we're an enterprise that's app sort of or development heavy. So it's kind of lots of in-house stuff being developed for whatever proprietary reasons. What's your take on that? Because we're Tracy, we're kind of looking at breaking up our application from that sort of monolithic into smaller modules. What's your sort of view of that?
It gets dicey because it depends entirely on the initial architecture that you're talking about. So spending a lot of decades looking and understanding inherently all of these different architectures, they're unique to the context that they were built in, to the business need that they had. When you start to refactor, you don't simply go in and say, I'm just going to rejigger, right? That's my term of the day. You're not just going to rewrite this small piece or refactor this one small piece. You need to look at it and understand what those changes can do, positive and negative, and understanding that. And it may be that you say, I am going to modernize by addressing kind of an O&M. This is a very traditional approach. If you have an application that is more stable, and you're going to be having an O&M team, an operations and maintenance team, or a sustainment team, as they are making the next round of changes, they may opt to refactor that feature or that capability so that it's leveraging a more modern technology. It adds a little bit of cost during that time. So the cost of the change, instead of being the traditional cost of we're making that monolithic change, it's always going to cost us, I'm going to make this up, 50 hours to make that change and to field that into production. The first time that you do this, it may take 60 hours, but I will then have saved, because the next time I make a change, I have applied some of those leading practices,
Right.
adopting DevSecOps principles, right? You don't have to do everything all at once, but adopting those principles, having things as smaller packages decomposed. It is not for the faint of heart, but it's not the most difficult thing. But it does take people sitting down, and not simply a developer making a decision on a Tuesday afternoon. It takes a little bit of thought ahead of time to look at that overall application and understand, where are our opportunities and where are the risks, right?
Yeah.
If you have something that is a core, it's used by everything, you might not want to touch that as your first area of refactoring.
Exactly.
Right? Look at it from a risk-based perspective. It's just like investing your money, right? Where am I going to get good value? And is that a really risky thing to touch? If I invest there, is that like 70% likelihood that I'm going to lose it, 25% chance of winning? Same thing when you're looking at this. What are the skill sets of my developers? What does the architecture look like beforehand? Where do I think I want to go? And what's the value of doing that?
Indeed, yeah, and it's as you said, it's an iterative process, because we kind of want to reuse some of the stuff that we've done before, and obviously improve on things that we're developing as well. So it is a stage 3. It is about applications, but it's also a cultural change. That's the impact. I think that's probably the greater impact, because we've proven in cloud and open source that we can do something technically in a zillion different ways, right? So it's not a technology barrier, it's more of a cultural sort of barrier, really, to get to stage 3, because we are changing the way that we develop applications, the way that we release updates and things like that. So we kind of get into CI/CD pipelines and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
And also how we maintain and manage the applications.
Well, this is often where the failure point comes, because there is cultural change that will happen, but you don't go in and say, I'm going to change the culture. This is where demonstrating model behaviors matters. Leadership, from highest leadership, the whole way, I'm going to say, down to the intern that's coming in the door. There has to be top down and bottom up agreement on what you're doing, because this is the hard part. This is change. This is actual change. We're going to be doing things in a different way. We're going to have teams reorganized to rally around potentially a particular module that was all part of a monolith before. So depending on how we're doing this, and we're going to make mistakes. So do we have leadership buy-in? What I find in really big organizations is that I might have the most senior leadership buy-in. I may have the teams themselves wonderfully on board, and it becomes the middle who are being held accountable to the initial milestones that were projected by somebody else.
Right.
They're being held accountable for that. So what happens if I want to make a change and it's going to take us a little bit of learning time? What happens if we want to make a change and we may have some failure? We might have to do this in an A/B. We may need to quickly roll back or roll forward with a fix. Do I have all the people bought in for this? This is the part of change that we don't have to over risk it, but we do have to move. We do have to keep going. And this is often where the failure happens. It's not with stage 4, which is the re-architecting, because if you get to that point, people are all in. They are all in on change. But it is the refactoring and the modernizing, moving from there, where they still have muscle memory. Muscle memory will drag you back, Richard. It will absolutely drag you back to the way that you used to behave. As soon as it gets tough, that first deployment that didn't work right, all of a sudden executives get cold feet. Now you have code freeze, or you have quarters where you're freezing what you're doing, and then you go back to these massive change boards, and this can grind to a halt right here.
Yeah, and right quickly as well. And I think that's definitely the danger of that. But yeah, I mean, those organizations that do push through and have the tenacity to kind of make it work, can kind of break through that barrier. And as we said, stage 3 is a barrier that organizations need to break through. And on the tech side, you are, as we said, breaking up that monolithic applications, at least into smaller modules, if not sort of microservices, doing cloud native properly for the first time, that sort of whole 12-factor application type of approach. You're certainly doing software development lifecycle SDLC proper kind of in full, application performance monitoring or APM, automation, configuration management, and also starting to maybe take advantage a lot more of those services that the cloud provides. So things like secrets management and observability and aiops. And as we said, also the how you do things like platform engineering, which helps you to really kind of set up that DevOps environment and help your developers to kind of get into shape in terms of the tools and the standards and frameworks that you can apply to DevOps, as well as site reliability engineering, or SRE, where essentially you're doing kind of your cloud ops as part of that sort of process as well.
We need an entire another hour to talk about SRE.
Yeah.
So every one of these words,
I'm
ready to dive in.
That's 2 talks so far we can follow up on. Brilliant. Yeah, definitely. I think that's all kind of absolutely part of it.
Well, I want everybody to understand, you've drawn this on the diagram. There are wavy lines in the background. The wavy lines in the background are meant to show that this is a continuum, and nothing that the hard lines are not hard lines. I will use automations when I'm replatforming. I will use some automations. I will use configuration management. I don't wait until I refactor for that.
Yeah.
So there are shades of this. I would actually say, and I'm going to put a shameless plug out here. I don't believe that microservices are always the answer. We actually are seeing industry. I've been pushing back against microservices. Sometimes they're great. Sometimes it's wonderful. I can tell you that the cognitive overload for an enterprise that attempts to adopt this based on their domains and how they're decomposing those boundaries, it can be tremendous. And microservices alone, it's a poor definition. We're going to see a different flavor of microservices in the next 2 years. So there's my prediction. You didn't ask for a prediction for 2024, 2025, but we're going to see microservices reshape, so that we can actually adopt them in a kind of a different way. They're not going to be as tiny. We're not going to see, we're going to have to reduce the cognitive overload on development delivery teams. So, cool. But I'm going to turn that back over to you and say, so we've talked about refactoring, and you're right. All of these capabilities, they don't live only with modernized. I can do some DevSecOps in my heritage data center. Absolutely. Some principles of all these things, but it's getting to the re-architect piece that I think is that's the golden state. And many may not get there. The juice may not be worth the squeeze. I see a lot of organizations stop with refactor because they get enough in their lexicon, enough value from that. Do you see the same thing, Richard?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there is, there's a lot of kind of scope for, how much you want to absorb of that sort of cloud nativeness, if you like, in stage 3. You could start very small, and as we said, you're not touching those, critical line of business applications. You're kind of aiming for those, low-hanging fruit, non-critical applications to refactor first, and then you essentially go from there. Okay, so Tracy, let's move on to stage 4. Now, as we said, we've kind of so far been focusing really on sort of getting our workloads into the cloud. So we kind of saw a little bit of that in stage 1 and stage 2. We said that, as we just said, the painful aspect of it comes in with kind of stage 3. That's where you kind of do all your cultural shifts and things like that. And now, once you're maybe kind of experienced with that, you start obviously doing more advanced things. And obviously, one of the sort of areas that you go into is thinking about things like serverless and so on. So for stage 4, as I class it in my chart, we're kind of re-architecting the way that we did a particular, let's say, business service. So we're no longer kind of really maybe even talking about kind of applications, but kind of in sort of business services or services that we provide to the business. So that kind of stage 4 re-architecture and a redesign, essentially a redesign of kind of how we offer that, service to the business. What was kind of your view on stage 4?
I'm going to back us up for just a moment, make sure that folks realize that the hard part is any kind of transition from 3 to 4. 3, as I said earlier, 3 is where folks naturally get stuck. And it's not necessarily a bad place because they are taking advantage. They have done refactoring. They may have added in a serverless function, right? They may have added in capabilities in refactoring, but not completely re-architected. And all of the stages themselves, as you and I have both said, they're not hard and fast. They're not black and white. There's so much beautiful gray across this. Re-architecting, if we're talking about an application or a business function, is the final step if you are maturing to be cloud native, if you truly want to take full advantage. Stateless apps are a natural part of it. Microservices, we'll see what happens. You're going to see dramatic changes in 2024 about microservices, right? They're on the hype cycle, but they do cause a lot of challenges, a lot of issues that are there. Taking a step back and looking at what you're trying to accomplish, there's a long game, right? A long game when it comes to completely re-architecting an application or a function, a feature, a business service. And you are trying to go from leveraging some of the cloud to being completely native to cloud. And what does that really mean? It means infinite scalability, infinite in air quotes, because infinite obviously is bound by your pocketbook. But it does allow you to have that surge capability that you need, the scalability as you've written out, right? You have that infrastructure as a service that we've started to use earlier. Everything in a cloud native situation is code. Everything is code. Every script, every document, every definition of every piece of network, of compute, of storage, everything is done in that way, right? You are getting after complete and total gitops, complete and total gitops. And so that re-architecting does take some time. I would say that culture shift happens the entire time, by the way. And I'm always going to say culture shift. I'm never going to say culture change. I try to catch myself because your culture grows together as you begin to have new behaviors together, bringing forward the best of the best, hopefully breaking some of the muscle memory of the past. This is where re-architecting will also impact new features, new capabilities that you're bringing into your organization, new products. Right? In a world where you've gone through this transition with an existing app, right? We have an asset, it's making us money, we want to take it forward, and you have re-architected, you've cut your teeth. It's harder to re-architect sometimes and then to build from new, right? Build from scratch, right? We call that greenfield. If it's a brand, I can do anything on a greenfield. I can build any kind of building on a greenfield. It's much harder if you have a brown field, if you have a foundation that's already in place, if there's HVAC already in the ground. So re-architecting does come with a little bit of, a little tax from the past that you are trying to overcome and pay down.
Yeah, and as we said, that, and the interesting thing is, as you and I kind of exchange on stage 3 and stage 4, there is differences there in kind of your perspective and my perspective, and that's fine because there is not necessarily any sort of hard and fast rules, which is all the more reason to kind of maybe try and have, particular targets or aims. And that's why this kind of, it was driving me crazy not having something to say, I can pin my strategy here in stage 3, or that's where we kind of want to go to. And then when we get a little bit more mature and experienced, then we can kind of start dabbling with kind of stage 4 type of stuff. And as you said, things like microservices could change as we sort of, progress in that strategy. So 2 years, 3 years time, when we get there as an organization, things may have changed in that space. So kind of how we look at it. So, that sort of maturity in our DevOps, platform engineering, our sort of cloud ops sort of approach. We bring kind of a lot of what we learned in stage 3 into stage 4, and really start, kind of, as you said, sort of seriously considering things like serverless, and we are now in that ephemeral storage and stateless apps kind of territory, and that pink line, as you called it, is kind of a lot more solid, towards the right, because that is sort of where we're achieving our cloud native, capability. And as you said, it's got to be things like, gitops, so which, infrastructure as code, policy as code, and things like that. All of those, I think, are now there for the taking. Now, we're not saying necessarily, go crazy, go and do all of them at the same time, but we are saying these are the things that you'd need to start considering and moving towards, advancing your experience towards, as you kind of start blurring maybe the lines between stage 3 and stage 4 technologies.
Yeah, there's every stage, every transition, every part of the journey has to always come back to asking some practical and pragmatic questions. Why? What is the why? There has to be a why. In the commercial world, we say that that's our business objectives. What is the business objective? Technology doesn't exist just to be technology. There's a business objective. So what is your business objective? And what is your risk profile? Do you have poor quality? If you have poor quality, what are you addressing and how are you addressing it? Do you want to have multiple different teams available to be able to take on ownership of functions, of pieces, of capabilities, of modules, and want them to be able to do it in complete and total autonomy? Okay, that's another driver. So you have to make sure you understand what's your why to doing these things. Simply, we're going to be the best of the best and do all of these leading practices. And why? You can be, what is it? Pound friendly, house rich, pound poor. You can do a lot in the name of making things better, but there has to be I'm always practical, always pragmatic. And this is probably what drives people crazy about me. I want everything to be perfect. I want it all to be looking at the best of the best models, the leading practices. And I know we're going to have to make some decisions, because everything that we're talking about comes with a price tag. So moving towards these things, having this kind of diagram, and there are others that are approximations of this. I think this is a really strong candidate. It helps you to drive the conversation. I would actually tell every one of our listeners to make sure that they grab a copy of this PDF so that they can have the conversation. They can draw their own roadmap using this. What is our particular journey? What do we want to accomplish and why? Exactly. Right? What's it going to cost us to do? Do we have the talent to do this? Do we have some additional upskilling that we're going to have to do that we didn't expect before? Well, on the journey, that might be a part of it. New contracts that might have to get negotiated. All kinds of crazy things happen, especially in mid to large organizations.
And that kind of maybe there's like a parallel skills roadmap as well that's required along the way, because you can't kind of get to, I'm sure it's not, as practical or as kind of simple as I'm putting it, but just kind of for argument's sake, you can't kind of go from, I think, say, so now we've kind of done stage 2, we've got an idea of contest, let's go into DevOps. And then you turn up on Monday and say, right, we're going to start doing DevOps stuff. Hang on, nobody knows anything about DevOps. We're not certified. We've not gone, nobody's got any experience. We haven't hired in some fresh blood that will kind of help us along the way.
Well, hell, you don't even need to be certified. You need to be able to speak the same language.
Exactly.
Does your organization have a definition of what DevOps is? The number one thing that happens to organizations that I come into who have written software and deployed it in production, and they're looking to start to pull in, and I'm going to use the terms apply DevOps principles, all of them need a definition because people disagree. Somebody thinks it's only the time that you check code into your code repository and it starts to move across the pipeline. Is that it? If you were to talk to some of our friends at the DevOps Institute, some of the ambassadors there, they would say DevOps starts at Vision. And if you talk to Helen, I think we have a mutual friend in Helen
Yeah,
Beal,
indeed.
we would take it back and start talking about the value stream and say, no, it starts at ideation.
Yes.
You can't put a steel girder through a wood chipper. So you have to be thinking about, how is it going to work if we're going to be moving smaller things across an automation assembly line? What does that really mean?
Yeah, just the thought of that is making me worried now. So. Perfect. That's very good. Yeah.
Let's
so
just go in and maybe there's a definition, Richard, that we help folks to have.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah,
they just
absolutely.
need to, it doesn't matter. Your definitions don't have to be perfect, but they do have to be agreed on by your organization.
Yes, exactly.
You just need a lexicon, and it doesn't have to be somebody else's. Make your own.
Indeed. And Helen Beal did kind of touch on that as well, I believe, in our conversation. So one last kind of interesting point on this sort of stage 4, and maybe kind of, maybe somewhere between stage 3 or stage 3 and stage 4. Startups, where do you think, I mean, I have some kind of experience with some that I've, sat through and kind of gone through some of their success stories and so on. People have presented in various conferences or whatever. But where do you think startups can kind of just come straight into having, let's say they have the knowledge, they have the people and so on. Do you think they can come straight into kind of stage 3, maybe even potentially stage 4, and just kind of kick off serverless and do everything serverless?
Absolutely. Because when you're starting, I mean, think about any kind of project that you've ever accomplished. Think about going to your local hardware store and you're doing something. Renovation, you always have to have a lot more understanding of what was done before. If you truly are going in for the first time and you don't even know what materials you're going to use and you're standing there and looking around, you can hop in straight into the deep end of the pool, so to speak. You can, and normally a startup is not going to have the same vibrant ecosystem as a startup as an established organization. So they should be thinking serverless or not. Well, that is an architectural trade-off decision that they have to make, but they do want to start with decoupled. The key thing here is all of the architecture, whether serverless or microservices, needs to be decoupled. They need to also have automations. Every place they can, everything is code. So if you start with those two things, we call it loose coupling or decoupled, and automations, repeatable automations. Those two things, start with those. Don't start with chaos engineering. You're going to rip your hair out. That's way too advanced.
Exactly.
Start with those two. Start with those two. And I believe that you can enter into a stage 4 world by starting with those two things.
Indeed. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I've kind of seen a similar sort of view for startups, because it's kind of predominantly greenfield for them. They don't need to go and buy a data center and all that kind of stuff and stuff it with servers and so on. They can just go straight into cloud and try and adopt some of these sort of more advanced functionality. Excellent. Okay, well, I'm sure we can go on for ages talking about this, Tracy, because we've had kind of an offline conversation. This is what the viewers are not aware of, that Tracy and I have been kind of having offline conversations in regards to this anyway. So yeah, there's so much more obviously to cover. We could have probably be here for hours, but we don't want to do that in this particular episode. Maybe I catch you in a future episode. But yeah, I just wanted to really thank you. Extremely useful insights, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for indulging me to kind of go through this particular chart, because it's kind of something that I've been developing, and I do, I'm quite opinionated about stuff, so I do put stuff out, and then people can quite happy to be challenged or to eat my words. I'm more than happy, because that means actually I learned something new from somebody else. But I do appreciate your insights. It's been very, very useful. So all the information on Tracy and what she gets up to on her kind of broadcast, and where you can catch her online, and all the details for that, links and so on, will be in the description of the video. Thank you guys all for watching, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.
Hey guys, thank you for watching this talk. Please subscribe to support the channel. We'll see you next time.